Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 o'clock and we've promised to start our webinar, today's webinar at this hour. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all from Brussels to, I don't know where you are. This is the lovely part about the webinars. So European University Association has been organizing regularly webinars on a variety of topics in the past years, and in particular in the past year during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the topic of our webinar is recognition, academic recognition, and how do we ensure fair and transparent recognition procedures through Bologna Process tools. A lot of tools have been developed in the Bologna Process in the past 20 years. And one of their aims has been to promote recognition of qualifications and study abroad periods. But there is plenty of evidence that shows that there is still some work to be done. So today we are going to look at how these Bologna tools such as ECTS, learning outcomes, qualification frameworks, and so on, could help us making recognition procedures fairer, smoother, and more transparent. We have a nice panel today talking about this topic from different perspectives. Howard Davis, Senior Advisor at EUA, has been working on these issues for a long time and will give us some general perspectives. Then Becky Pavletic from the Executive Committee from the European Students' Union will provide us with the student perspective with some fresh data on how it looks like recognition procedures are working. And then we will wrap up, importantly, with Marijke Blom-Westrik, Policy Officer from Nuffic from the Netherlands, who will tell us how this works in practice, or how it should work in practice, the recognition procedures. My name is Tia Loukkola. I'm the Director for Institutional Development here at EUA. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this one. And a couple of practicalities before I give the floor to our speakers. Well, first of all, you have a couple of ways to interact with us, and we do hope that you do so. First of all, on your on the right side of your screen, you will see three different how do I say? Sections. First of all, there is a chat through which we encourage you to put out their greetings, alert us if you have technical issues, or discuss with the other participants about the topic, or just provide your perspective on how things are working, for instance, in your institution or in your NICNARIC, where you come from. Wherever you come from. Then there is another section where there's a which is called Q&A. Through that one, you can pose questions to our speakers, and we will be picking them up during this hour. So please do so. And secondly, please vote on the questions that you see there. We will want to see which ones you think are the most pertinent from your fellow participants. And then finally, we have put some handouts to the third section, where some documents that will be referred to during this hour can be found. So this is the basic setting. And then need to say still, this webinar is being recorded. You can find the recording at EUA YouTube channel after the session has finished. You and all the people who have registered for the webinar will also receive a direct link to the recording. So if you want to share it with your colleagues afterwards, you will have the direct link to the recording. And you will also have a link to the presentations made during the power slides made to used during this hour. So that is the setting of our event. And now I propose we give the floor to Howard. You've been working on these matters a long time, and we would want you to kind of set the stage for us. You've been working, for instance, on the various editions of the European Area of Recognition Manual. What should the recognition procedures ideally look like from your perspective? Howard.
Thank you very much, Tia. Good afternoon, everybody. Very good to be with you. I hope you can hear me. I assume you can hear me, and
yes.
Somebody is nodding their Marika. Thank you very much. Okay. My job really is to set the scene, as you say, Tia, and I'll do that. This is a brief overview of what I'm going to do. I'm going to mention the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which underpins everything. Address the somewhat confused question of who recognizes what and why do they recognize. Remind listeners and viewers of the principles on which recognition is based. And then in the end, I think come to how recognition should work in practice. But that is something that I'll just really touch on, and my colleagues, and thereafter we can explore it in greater detail. Let me move then to the first slide. I don't want to spend too long on this slide. It's simply to say this, that we have in our title Bologna Tools, and Tia has mentioned already the Bologna Tools. They've been endorsed by the ministers of the Bologna Process. Some of them are in European Union legislation, but they are all underpinned by the Lisbon Recognition Treaty. It's a treaty signed by virtually all of the European countries. If you want to check what role your particular country plays in the Lisbon Recognition Convention, then you can go to the first URL, which is there under bullet point 2, and it will tell you there which countries have signed, which countries have ratified, and so on. But it's important to know where your country stands. When you have done that, you could proceed, if you wish, to the remaining web addresses there, and you'll discover the text of the convention, and you'll see that it covers recognition of full qualifications, joint degrees, periods of studies abroad. It talks about legacy qualifications, and it talks about refugees who may lack documentation, and so on and so forth. It is a basic text, and I encourage everybody to read it. However, let me proceed to the more substantive slides. Now, this one contains, on the first bullet point there, an absolutely fundamental principle of recognition, which is this: that recognition confers the right to be considered for admission to a particular program. It does not guarantee admission. Now, that suggests that conceptually recognition and admission are different activities, and that indeed is the case. They can be undertaken by different people in different places at different times. Recognition and admission are not the same. They can be undertaken simultaneously by one person, for example, in the University International Office, who recognizes and admits to a course at more or less the same time. But technically, they are different procedures. And it leads to a complicated landscape, made even more complicated by the fact that the national recognition centers, one exists in each country, do not all have the same remit. They don't all have the same mission. Some of them recognize in a way that has legal standing. It's legally binding on the university. Some simply give advisory notifications regarding qualifications. Some will recognize for some purposes, like the labor market, but not for other purposes, and so on. So they are all different. And again, whichever country you are in, you should check, if you wish to know, exactly what your national academic recognition agency does. And it also follows, therefore, from that higher education's institutions do not have the same powers of recognition. In law, they may be limited. In law, it may be the ENIC-NARIC Center that recognizes, or by choice, they may not recognize. Some universities outsource the recognition process to other agencies. It is, as I say, a complex landscape. What does recognition do? It establishes that a qualification is authentic. That is a basic task. Having done that, it then determines whether a qualification is appropriate for entering higher education, for progressing in higher education, or for accessing the labor market. That is what it does. It's based on a number of principles, which I'll rehearse briefly, very schematically in the time available. Again, it's important to look at number one. When we are recognizing, we are attempting to meet the aspirations of the applicant, but we are also, in terms of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, we are attempting to widen participation in higher education. So recognition is a progressive activity. It's a liberal activity. It tries to bring in to higher education as many people as possible. Of course, the procedures have to be transparent, coherent, and reliable. The key concept is the one of substantial difference, because it often happens that the qualification that an applicant brings with his or her application is not quite the one that is expected by the person who might wish to admit you to a particular program. If the gap is substantial, then alternative modes of recognition exist. You can recognize alternatively, partially, conditionally, and if you like, we can come back to those. Important to say, again, inscribed in the convention, that every applicant has rights, and I'll read them. The applicant has a right to non-discriminatory treatment, to accessible and accurate information, to timely notification of how the application is progressing, and to a clear decision delivered within a specified time frame, and to guidance on how to appeal the decision if the decision goes against the wishes of the applicant. Recognition in practice, this is my final slide. The recognition practice has evolved, is continuing to evolve over the years. Historically, it used to be the case that recognizers would look to see if the qualification possessed by the applicant was identical to the domestic qualification that would be used to access higher education by one of the citizens of the country concerned. And that was called homologization or nostrification, looking for identity between the qualification that is brought and the one that is already held by the citizens of the country concerned. Instead, and in order to widen participation and in order to be as generous to applicants as possible, we now look for factors that are not identical, but we look for those that are comparable rather than identical. And we do this by looking at the learning outcomes and qualification frameworks. If the qualification that is brought by an applicant fits in the same way as the domestic qualification does in the national or the European framework, that's fine. And we also look to see, rather than considerations of duration or workload, we look to see whether the learning outcomes are comparable, if they correspond between the two qualifications. And then if that is the case, then everything can proceed. My final URL here is the reference that Tia made to the EAR HEI manual. That's the European Area of Recognition Higher Education Institution manual. Please look at it. It contains wonderful flowcharts, diagrams on all sorts of aspects of the recognition process. You will know how to recognize diploma mills. You will be able to appreciate the nuances of substantial difference. You'll be able to understand how to recognize joint programs and so on and so forth. It is very, very comprehensive, and it is periodically revised. I think, Tia, that I've come to the end of my time, and so I pass back to you.
Thank you, Howard. You would say it has a lot of wonderful characteristics, this manual, because you have been drafting them, I think, on various occasions. The manual for the higher education institutions is at the moment in its third edition. So it's been revised for quite a few times. Why is that?
Well, originally, the original manual in 2012 was just the European Area of Recognition Manual, and it was designed mainly for the staff of the ENIC NARIC centers. It was primarily an internal document, although it was available publicly. We then realized that indeed many of the persons who are engaged in the business of recognition, belong to higher education institutions, and they were not the immediate target of the manual. So we decided that what was needed was a manual destined specifically for higher education institutions. And there, as you say, there have been 3 editions since then, I think 2014, 2016, 2020, something like that. Basically, the structure has remained the same. The methodology has remained the same. As I say, each chapter takes you through a sequence of steps in the recognition process. It's very well illustrated by flowcharts with bifurcatory mechanisms, what happens if, yes, no, and so on and so forth. And this has more or less remained the same. The new editions, we've taken the opportunity to update the web addresses, to refine some of the flowcharts, to incorporate new reference texts, and so on and so forth. But essentially, the substance is the same. I suppose if they've developed at all, it's with a greater focus on refugees and on people in refugee-like situations. That's the phrase that's used because of the refugee crisis of a few years ago. And there is more now relating to what is called automatic recognition, which didn't exist in such prominence back in 2012. But as I say, in essence, the substance is the same, and it is now web-based, and it's for that reason it's much more easy to revise it. But I know I have a vested interest in saying this, but I do heartily, enthusiastically recommend it to all our colleagues in the webinar.
Yes, well, we would, as EUA has been part of it, so we would do recommend it. Yes. Okay.
And ESU also, I should add, ESU and EUA were brought into the process as advisors, and the whole venture was steered by Nuffic in the Netherlands, funded by the European Commission, and steered as part of the Bologna Process. It began, in fact, under the aegis of the Bologna Process Working Group on Recognition many years ago.
Okay. Thank you, Howard, for setting the stage and showing us that there is a framework, there is guidance for recognition in Europe, and in theory, things should be working. I would now move to the student perspective. What do the students say about this? Is it working? What does it look like? What's the state of play? And here, I think Becky has relatively fresh information for us to share.
Yes, thank you very much. So I will speak today a little bit about the challenges of recognition in higher education. I am a newly elected representative of the Executive Committee of the European Students' Union, and actually today, before this event, but also quite until in the afternoon, we will be presenting our new book, which is called Bologna with Student Eyes 2020, and it speaks about the recognition, and I will touch upon these matters here in the presentation as well. So in this publication, Bologna with Students' Eyes, we actually had 37 participating countries, and I divided, let's say, these 4 fields, which are the Diploma Supplement, recognition on 4A diplomas, credits and qualifications, transparency and accessibility of the recognition systems, and the improvement areas that we defined. In the document itself, you will not find it divided like this, but actually I did it so because of the time limit for this event. So first, in regards to Diploma Supplement, we saw that still there is a large number of countries that still do not have any legislation in regards to the European Diploma Supplement. And this is something that we highly encourage, especially now with the incoming of the micro-credentials. We see that the Diploma Supplement is more than necessary to kind of recognize maybe these credentials as well as a part of the student's work. And we see that around 25% do not actually know whether their Diploma Supplement is free of charge, and 14% say that it is not free of charge, which is also something that saddens us quite, because we consider that this is something that is an additional to the education of the student, and that should also be free for the students as a way to kind of also honor the activities that they did during their times at the university, just to kind of show all of these abilities that they have collected. A recognition of foreign diplomas, credits, and qualifications. I divided it like this. So we see that three different stakeholders are included. So first are the ECTS agencies, then the governmental institutions, and the higher education institutions. And we have also assessed the combinations of these institutions and how they had an impact on different types of recognition processes. When we speak about the foreign diplomas recognition, they were regulated mostly by ECTS and the governmental institutions, while the small part was actually governed in the combination of ECTS and HAYS, or higher education institutions themselves. When we speak about the recognition of foreign credits, then we see that this is actually the field that is mostly regulated by higher education institutions, as we actually consider it is right to do so. But also we see that still other stakeholders can have an impact on this as well as governmental organizations and institutions as well. Qualifications are usually mostly recognized through ECTS or in combination of ECTS higher education institutions, but we also see that the governmental institutions have a certain say in this as well. In some countries, we actually found out that the labor market stakeholders can also recognize foreign qualifications, which was something like a new information for us. And this also is quite interesting, because this means that the labor market can decide for themselves who they want to let enter their labor market and the working force. And this is something that's really interesting, because we didn't hear about this before, and this is something that we will definitely have to look into more in the future. If we look at the transparency and accessibility of the recognition systems, we see that around 43% of participants agree that the recognition process is transparent, but around 32% disagree, which is kind of similar to this percentage of 43, and we see that this recognition process goes mostly through the higher education institutions and governmental institutions, and they are one of the reasons that the participants consider the process to be transparent. We have the 25% of participants which consider that the process is simple, so this means that we still have room for improvement there, and this is also in comparison in regards to the higher education institutions and the governmental institutions as well. And the most simple process of recognition was actually recognized within the mobility systems at any level of education, and this is something that participants think is the best developed system of recognition of all. If we look at the situation from 2018, we see that the lack of trust in the validation of qualifications was quite high. This is something that we can still see today, but we think that the situation has improved to some extent. The improvement areas that we see that have the space to kind of develop a little bit more is definitely the automatic recognition. And that's because around 86% of our participants consider that this is the area that needs improvement the most out of all of them. And also some of them consider that the automatic recognition should be put in place wherever the institutions have this collaboration agreement between themselves, because this would also improve the situation in general and improve the process of the recognition and give the student some security when asking for these credits later at their institutions. What we see is still a problem in comparison to the Bologna with Student Eyes 2018 is the long recognition procedures and the lack of different systems in place that will assure the same working structure as in the EU countries outside of the EU. We also see that the recognition of prior learning is still not established in many countries. And this is something that troubles a lot of students from those countries, because we all know that we are creating, let's say, a European identity. And this is something that would be extremely helpful for us if it would be implemented in all of the countries. And this is something that we really, really need to strive towards. The development of the national qualifications framework is absolutely necessary as well, because we think that this will help define the relations between the labor market and the higher education institutions and the qualifications that come from it. And of course, the consistencies in recognition procedures is quite relevant as well. I have put here just my contact and all of the ESU contacts as well, where you can follow us. Also, I wanted to add, if you want to read more about the Bologna with Student Eyes 2020, you can definitely do so, because from today, this information will become public.
Yes, there is more data in the report. Of course, in this kind of short amount of time, you cannot go through all of it. I thought about the slide that you had about transparency and accessibility of recognition procedures. It looked like it's you can look at it differently. The glass is half empty or it is half full, and so there is work to be done. And then nicely you summarized from the student perspective of things that we do need to improve. Based on all this, do you rather remain positive and optimistic that these things are moving along, or is it more like, oh, we've said this forever, nothing is happening?
Mm-hmm. I would say that with the creation of European qualifications framework and with the implementation of different national qualifications framework, the system has become more transparent than before. And I think that this is also reflected in the answers that we received from the students. However, I still believe that in the process of the automatic recognition, there is still a lot of work to be done, because we see that automatic recognition is something that is largely discussed, but still not implemented to an extent due to lack of trust between the institutions. The students define that this is probably the reason. So I think that yeah, we can be optimistic, and there are lots of new things coming in, and the students see that recognition is something that is also becoming one of the main reasons that attracts students to kind of look at the programs that they're going to study and decide which university they want to go to. So I remain quite optimistic, because I think that the recognition will be one of the top priorities for students when even enrolling into institutions. And I see now that the situation is much better than it was before, and I'm sure it's just gonna continue stabilizing and growing and developing more.
Okay. That's a good way to wrap up the intervention. Then we will move to Mareike, who will explain to us how does this happen? How do you have a smooth and fair recognition that the students are calling for as well? But before I stop, I will just say that to the participants that feel free to add more questions to our speakers, and importantly, to vote on the questions that are already in that tab. So Mareike, how does recognition work in practice?
Yes, well, thank you, Tia. I just want to support Howard with his with his suggestion, read the ERH manual, because there's a lot to gain there, a lot of interesting subjects, very important for the daily work of an admission officer especially. So, well, first of all, I want to thank the EUA for having me today as a presenter, and I'm really honored to be in this webinar, because there's so many participants showing interest in these tools about Bologna. So what I want to talk about is this, a couple of Bologna tools: Diploma Supplement, ECTS, the 3-cycle system in higher education, qualification frameworks, and quality assurance. And well, I want to take you back actually to 1999, when the Bologna Declaration was signed, which is like 2 years before, after the Lisbon Recognition was signed. So that's basically the time frame when it all began, and it's for that reason that they are called Bologna tools. So in the slides, I have mentioned some websites that are relevant for the topic on the slide. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. In the Bologna Declaration, several objectives were stated. A couple of them were, we want to have comparable degrees with the use of the Diploma Supplement. We want to have a 2-cycle higher education system, undergraduate and graduate. At the time, it was 2 cycles, and that changed later on. We want to have a standardized credit system, something like ECTS. And they also wanted European cooperation on quality assurance. And all the the Bologna tools that are mentioned here originate from this Bologna Declaration. So after Bologna, every 2 or 3 years, you would have the ministerial meetings of the ministers of education, who would come together and would see how much progress was made, and what would be the priorities in the next 2 or 3 years. And at the end of the meeting, then a communique would be adopted. So in the slides, I've also mentioned the relevant communiques for further reading, and you can find them on the EHEA website. And it's very nice. If you read them, you can follow the timeline and the progress of the whole Bologna process. So first of all, the Diploma Supplement, very important tool. It has a standardized format, which was determined on European level by European Commission, UNESCO, and the Council of Europe. And it has had several revisions, and the latest one is one from 2018, and it has the Europass logo on it. So this one that I have made a screenshot of is the latest version. And the Diploma Supplement is all about information provision. You have in the format, standardized format, you have 8 sections with information about the study load in ECTS, program, entry requirements, rights for further study, learning outcomes, and the whole content of the program. So this is all about transparency, and it helps if when the students have a Diploma Supplement, helps them to find a job, because the learning outcomes will give the necessary information to the employer, and it helps to get it recognized easier, and also for further study purposes. This is very, very handy. And the Diploma Supplements are issued for free by the higher education institutions, and you see different formats. At the bottom of the slide, you see a link to the different formats per country, and you see them issued in the national language, but also bilingual versions with English added, or even I saw the Spanish one is trilingual even. So that's issued by the higher education institutions, and I think it started around 2005 when this was widely spread. So yeah, this is all about mobility, recognition, and transparency, and it really helps. Well, I was very happy with the Diploma Supplements because it made my life as credential evaluator much easier. So let's move on to the ECTS system, European Credit Transfer and Accumulation System. Well, I do not have to explain how convenient and important it is to have one standardized credit system in the whole area. It's very much standardized, transparent, and it makes mobility and recognition so much easier because everybody knows what ECTS stands for. And it's funny because ECTS already existed before Bologna and before the Lisbon Recognition Convention was signed. It started actually in 1989 when the Erasmus programs used the ECTS for their joint programs. So that's why the Bologna Declaration said, well, we want to have a standardized credit system, something like ECTS. And in the end, it became the ECTS system for the European higher education area. So the standard workload for one academic year is set on 60 ECTS, with one ECTS representing 25 to 30 hours of work, which is not only the contact hours, but also the individual work that the student is doing. And again, this is not a one standard. There's flexibility here, also taking into account the wide range of study hours per year that you can see in the different education systems. It's somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 hours of work. So there's flexibility that takes into account the diversity of the different education systems. And the ECTS are used in the diploma supplements, in the course catalogs of the higher education institutions where the programs are described, but also in learning agreements when students want to do an exchange and the number of ECTS is there. When the student comes back, it will be recognized and it's all transparent. And of course, it's also there on the transcript of records with the obtained results. So one more thing, it's also, of course, very important when you set up a new program as in your institution, right? You have to assign ECTS workloads to the different educational components of your program. So if you want to have some more guidelines on that and some more background information on the use of ECTS, I can recommend the ECTS Users Guide. I think the latest version is 2015. It has been revised a couple of times, and the link is there on the right side of the slide. All right. On to the 3-cycle system. Well, as I said, it started as a two-cycle system in the Bologna Declaration with undergraduate and graduate. But after the Berlin Communiqué in 2003, it was decided that the doctoral phase would be the 3rd cycle. So we end up with a 3-cycle system. And for every cycle, there have been credits assigned, again, with some flexibility. So you see that the bachelor programs of the 1st cycle have a range between a 3 or a 4-year program, 180 and 240 ECTS. The masters, 1 to 2 years. And for the doctorate programs, no credits assigned because they are usually individual programs, sometimes with coursework, sometimes not, very much geared towards the need of the individual student. So no credits there. And the short cycle was later on introduced in, I think, 2018 with the Paris Communiqué. It was also put into this framework with 120 ECTS. So this is basically the associate degree. And it's up to every education system, every country to use it or not. So the whole idea is that after every cycle, the student is prepared for further study, but also for access to the labor market. And at the end of every cycle, there are level descriptors, so kind of learning outcomes, if you like, that describe what kind of level and knowledge and competences have been achieved. And we see the 3-cycle system coming back in the on this one, in the qualification frameworks, because it started as the 3-cycle system with only higher education involved, and that was eventually named the qualification framework of the European higher education area. And at the same time, you see that the European Union was also developing its own qualification framework, which also included the levels below higher education. So that's an 8-level system in the end, and that one is called EQF for lifelong learning. So, but basically the 3 cycles in higher education overlap with EQF. So the next step would be for the individual states to develop their own national framework. And this could be, not, like in this example, this could be not 8 levels, but also 10 levels. It very much depends on the structure of the education system that you're dealing with. And then the next step would be referencing the levels to the European qualification framework. And there you have your transparency, the comparable degree structure that Bologna was talking about. So this is what I've done in the screenshot. This is from the Europass portal, and you can compare them with the different levels and link them to the EQF. So in terms of transparency, yes, this is a very good tool to have, and standardization of the different education systems within the European higher education area. Which brings me to the final slide. And well, there has been a lot of progress in quality assurance since Bologna. And international cooperation is very successful, I would say. So I've just picked 2 topics from the quality assurance field, the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance in the EHEA and the ECHR register. So basically the ESGs have been initiated by the E4 group, the ENCA, the Eurasia, the European Student Union, and also today's host, the European Universities Association. And they've been revised since 2005. So the latest version is 2015. And they consist of 3 parts, actually. The first part is for the higher education institutions to have the internal qualification assurance policy. And it's about, well, you should have an internal quality assurance policy in place. You should have standardized procedures for the student life cycle from registration till graduation. You should have standardized procedures for setting up new programs, for monitoring and reviewing the programs. And also you should undergo external quality assurance. So this should sound familiar for you, but you should have your internal policy, and probably it's based on the ESG, and maybe you're not even aware of it, but it's there. And the external quality assurance standards and guidelines, which are part 2 of the whole document, refers to the quality assurance agency. And it's also about standardized procedures, predetermined criteria, and also the report, the final report needs to be published. And the third part is about criteria for the quality assurance agency itself. It should be a legal entity, it should be autonomous, independent, have enough resources to do its job properly. And also they themselves have to undergo quality assurance, external quality assurance, to be sure that they are acting conform the ESGs. So standardization, fair procedures, transparent procedures. Which also, the ESG also come back in the ECHR register. Basically, this is a register of trustworthy quality assurance agencies in Europe. They cannot be registered if they are not in compliance with the ESG. And basically, if they're in the list, they are trustworthy, and they have some criteria that they have to meet. And the DECAR database is the database of the programs that these agencies have approved. And the whole idea behind this is, if one of the agencies has approved the program, the others automatically recognize this decision. So this is already a further step towards automatic recognition. And then I have the latest update on the DACAR register database for you. It's called DACAR Connect. The project has been running since spring 2020, and it's all about connecting the agencies, the quality assurance agencies, with the register, so that more and more programs will be in there in the database. And one final thing that I want to put into the spotlight is the free course for online, a free online course for admission officers. It's called Stream, and you can find it on the ENIC-NARIC website. It's for free. You just register and you start following the course. It's all about the topics that I've just mentioned. It's based also on the ERHA manual that Howard just mentioned. So. It's there for you if you want to know more about the Bologna. That's it, Tia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marike. Indeed, the Stream platform, the training, those of you who are working with recognition, please go ahead and have a look at it. Just to directly follow up on what you wrapped up with, the quality assurance and the accreditation. We have the top question is, does recognition depend on the accreditation of the higher education institution?
Oh, yes, certainly.
I think you were trying to convene that it does.
Yes,
what about those then that are not accredited? How do you, for instance, approach them?
Well, I think accreditation is all about quality, that the quality has been checked. And if no agency, no authority has looked at it, then you don't know. You basically don't know about the quality. So it can be a very good institution or program, or it can be very bad, but there must be a reason why there is no accreditation. Sometimes they choose not to be accredited because they want to do it their own way. And others, maybe they applied, but they failed. If you don't have the background information, you don't know about it. But I think accreditation is one of the strongest criteria for go or no go.
Yeah. Okay, let's take the whole panel to the screen, so Howard and Becky to return as well. I do have to say that we don't have accreditation in all the countries, but it's external quality assurance, at least in some format. And there we go back to the DACAR Connect project, where you can check if an institution or a program has gone through some kind of external quality assurance. But then another question that is top rated is that there are different information, there exists different kind of information about degree meals. Which list should we trust? Are there international standards for this topic? I don't know if Howard, do you want to say, how do you find out about degree meals? I think we could take away the slides while we're in this setting, just a hint to my colleagues. But Howard, degree meals. How do you know if something is a degree meal?
I think the operative word is suspect rather than know. I mean, the first movement, the first intellectual movement is suspicion. Something raises your doubts about the origin of a qualification, and you then look at the issuing institution or authority, whatever it is, and then you seek corroboration of its status, either from government records or from other registers, or from the experience of colleagues that you may have worked with, who may know something about this. But there are certain signs to look for. Many diploma mills will mimic the behavior and the appearance of authentic institutions. So it may be that a diploma mill characterizes itself as the University of X, where X is very, very similar to a very well-known university. It pretends to ride in the same cloak as the authentic institution. Often the courses that the diploma mill will offer contain very little academic achievement. They make no requirements of anybody. They have more or less zero duration. They don't present themselves in any way with the sort of profile that you would expect from an orthodox accredited academic program. But there are no final determined lists of existing diploma mills, because once a diploma mill is discovered, then of course it puts on another costume and appears somewhere else in a different guise. I think at one stage the federal authorities in the US had a list of diploma mills, but I'm not sure that that is regularly consulted or that it's reliable. I think that in the US, the federal authorities are not known for their deep knowledge about the American higher education system, which is basically state regulated and not federal regulated. And so it is a complex question. A lot of it depends on intuition. A lot of it depends on your ability as a credential evaluator to contact your peers and see what they think. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of this institution? No, I never heard of it. And so on and so forth. That's how it proceeds, really. But there is no statutory list. There may be a list of convicted mills, but that doesn't mean that they haven't reappeared somewhere else. Let's call them variants. Let's call them variants. That's a topical term.
So what you're basically saying is that there is no way around. You have to go through the certain detective work.
It's forensic.
Yes. Two topics appear high on the list of questions that I think we are discussing a lot nowadays. A, joint programs, and B, micro-credentials. So I would ask Marika first about joint programs. We have a question that double degree diplomas and their recognition, or joint programs. There are different regulations what kind of qualifications or diplomas the students get in the end. Sometimes you get one that is shared by the institutions issue one. Sometimes that is against the law, so institutions issue different ones. Is there any rule in recognition? How do you deal with these?
Yes, that's a very good topic, very good question, and when you're dealing with different countries, you're dealing with different education systems with different legislation in place. So this makes it complicated. However, there's good news. The European approach for joint degrees is I think the newest thing in this field. And the basic idea behind this is that what I mentioned earlier with the DECAR database, if one of the quality assurance agency looks at the program, it looks at the whole program, not only the part of the country where it's situated, but for the whole program, and the report has to be accepted by all the other agencies. So in this way, you will avoid all the trouble with different legislations, different regulations, and recognition becomes easier. However, this is still at the starting point, and well, if you check the DECAR database, it's not complete. So you also have to check the Quality Assurance Agency website for more information. But this is supposed to make things easier for the joint degrees and the double degrees. Yes.
As long as the member states would, or the countries would allow it and make it in practice. Yeah.
Yes.
Then there's a question about the micro-credentials to Becky. What is the students' view on recognition of micro-credentials? Will this complicate things or help building trust?
Yeah, definitely this is something that is still being discussed, but students see that this is that the micro-credentials actually hold a really large potential for students to create, let's say, an individualized like program of activities for self during their studies, and that can be recognized by their institution for helping them in their education or in their professional path as well. So yeah, micro-credentials definitely are seen as a great contributor to that. Of course, that there are also maybe these questions that arise constantly, like how they should be credited, who should make sure that they are given, who should like be the expert who will say, okay, this micro-credentials goes in or goes out, who will control the way of distribution. And I think we are still at the point of discussing this, but in general, I think that the view is quite positive on the micro-credentials themselves, and I don't think it's seen as a threat. Maybe it's more seen as a threat by the institutions themselves, because someone else is providing something for the students, which an institution in the end cannot, I mean, can control to an extent, but maybe not like entirely, especially if it's a non-formal form of education or activity which isn't certified. And it's also kind of it will have to create some sort of trust between the students and the institutions themselves. And I think that this is probably the way in which micro-credentials will be formulated the best. But in general, yes, as I say, I think it's quite positive.
Yes, this will raise more questions about the recognition procedures and recognition of prior learning, for instance, in the institutions. For the audience to know, I think all the organizations that are now here speaking, we're all involved in different kind of constellations at European level, discussing how to provide a framework for micro-credentials in Europe. And we are expecting quite a lot of work to be done in the next 2 years, and let's see the results. And we will probably have a new webinar on that. So I will not go into more details on the current state of play. But I would like to, I know we're running out of time, but I would like to take one practical question that is in the chat box, because it is very essential and it is very typical. And even if we have a case here, I know this happens also between other countries. So we have a case. German University of Applied Sciences complain that their 3-year bachelors are not admitted to British postgrad programs, which appear to require a 4-year honors degree. What shall the 3-year bachelors do? We have other countries as well where we have this, that is the bachelor 3 or 4 years, and can you then move on to the master's in another country? Hasn't this been, shouldn't this have been resolved by the new Bologna structure and the national qualification frameworks? And here I'm looking at first Marike and then Howard as well. Brief reactions to this persisting problem. Marike.
Yeah. I'm very aware of this problem, and we have had many complaints also from Dutch students going abroad and saying we don't get the same rights as we have in the Netherlands with our qualifications, and they are counting years, which is not Bologna proof. So yeah. You can provide them with information. That's what we do. We try to give the background information, and you have ratified Lisbon, and why is this? Why are you doing this? Because in our country they have these and these rights, and that's as far as the role of the INICNARIC goes. We can provide them with the right information, and then it's up to the host country to decide on how to evaluate it. But it's far from that we are on one line and everybody is recognizing in the same way. There definitely still are problems, and mostly I don't know what the thought behind it is, but counting years the old-fashioned way would still be there, I think, but I'm not sure if that's the reason. But yeah, this is very familiar problem.
Okay.
Howard, you have
Howard, last word.
Last word. Last word. Thank you very much. Well, I'm not sure. It's very difficult to generalize, is it not? All of these things have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. After all, applications made by students who wish to progress to another institution, they are all individual applications. And I think it's very, very hard to generalize. In the particular case or group of cases that's mentioned, I wonder, is it duration that is the key question, or is it the profile of the institution from which the student came, and so on and so forth? I would like to look at the details of each particular application before passing any judgment at all. But I agree absolutely with Maraka that duration, the number of years, is of interest, but it is not of crucial interest anymore. What is the key factor is always going to be, from now on, I think, and should be, the learning outcomes. What has the student in his or her previous existence achieved, and is this useful and necessary and applicable to the course for which she wants to apply? And that is the basic fundamental consideration. And everything should work on the fact that it is applicant-centered, and we are working for the good of the applicant, and we are trying to widen participation and not be protectionist. That's my final word, since you invite me to have one. Thank you.
That's a great conclusion for our webinar. We need to go back to the basics and what are we trying to do here. So we've spent 1 hour. So I take the opportunity to thank our panelists for their participation. Thank you for taking this time. For all the participants, you will get some links from us, and links to different materials will be available on our academic hub website, for instance, that we have just created, which I hope my colleagues will put the link to the chat box. So please go ahead, go there and have a look at all these documents and resources that have been also referenced during this hour. EUA webinars continue. We will have the next one on the 5th of February about digitally enhanced learning. And then there will be many other webinars, and we will return back to the recognition matters in the end of April 29th. So please note that webinar at least on your agenda. So thank you for everyone for this lovely moment in this afternoon talking about recognition. We're making progress, but we're not quite there. But I hope we have managed to give you the basic principles of what we should be considering when we develop our recognition procedures in the European higher education area and even beyond. So thank you, and have a nice afternoon.